Thank you for joining us for another edition of Diplomacy Classroom. I'm Lauren Fischer with the National Museum of American Diplomacy, and I'm so happy to host today's program in which we will discuss the Great Seal, the symbol of our nation, how it is used, where we see it, and why the National Museum of American Diplomacy should be interested in sharing its importance. But first, for all of those watching, I want to make sure that you are following the museum on all of our social media platforms. So scroll down to the bottom of our page to see all of our social media icons at NMAD Museum. Sign up to receive our emails, announcements, and follow us on our social media so you can learn about future programs. So for today's discussion about the seal, NMAD's Public Historian Dr. Alison Mann will be joining us. And after our discussion, we will be taking your questions and reading your comments and your thoughts. So please fill the comment box with those thoughts and questions. We look forward to seeing those at the conclusion of our discussion today. The mission of the National Museum of American Diplomacy is to tell the stories of American diplomacy, the history, the challenge, the practice, and to share all of those through our exhibits, our artifact collections, as well as programs such as this. It is also to help our audiences better understand the function and the role and the history of the State Department. And in fact, by our highlighting the Great Seal, we need to go back to the origins of our nation. So after we declared independence in 1776, Congress called for an emblem or a coat of arms, a symbol that would represent our new nation to all the nations of the world. So in true bureaucratic fashion, a committee was formed, which included John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, and they went to work on figuring out what that symbol would be. Well, it took a while to figure it out. It took like 7 years to figure it out. But once the seal was created and Congress accepted it, the responsibility of overseeing its use fell to the U.S. Department of State, which was the first federal agency with the mission of overseeing all matters as it related to the nation state, so the State Department. So the State Department is the custodian of our Great Seal. We are also called the keepers of the Great Seal. So to kind of, before we bring Alison to the screen, I also want you, our viewers, to be aware that on the museum's website, we have some additional information. Here we are. So here you see a representation of the seal and a video and an explanation that gets into a little bit more detail about the history of the seal. You also see a PDF here that is of a packet that really gets into sort of the timeline of the development of the seal, the committee, what they accomplished, and that's something that you can print out and hand out to your students or interested folks. Because we are talking about the seal, I thought it made sense to be able to pause and take a look at it. And so here you see a rendering of it. This is our nation's Great Seal. There's an eagle here in the middle, and in the eagle's talons, we see an olive branch with 13 leaves. And in the other talon, we see arrows, 13 arrows. And of course, the number 13 that pops up in this image a couple of times refers to the 13 original states. You also see the 13 stars above the eagle's head. And in the shield in front of the eagle, you see 13 stripes, again, referring to the 13 original states. But you also see the blue bar. And that blue bar signaling that we are, although 13 states, we are one unified nation. And that's what the E pluribus unum refers to, out of many one, which is of course in the ribbon that the eagle is holding in its mouth. So this is an image of our Great Seal. And we also have on our website a great video that allows you to kind of get a closer look and to meet some of the folks who take care of the seal. So let me go ahead and play this now.
The Great Seal of the United States is essentially our nation's emblem. It's our coat of arms, and it differentiates us among the nations of the world. So for example, there are 13 arrows on one side and 13 olives on olive branches. And of course, the olive branch reflecting our preference for peace, but the arrow is also reflecting our right to defend ourselves in war if needed. Great Seal is only applied to a document that is signed by both the President and the Secretary of State. Most of them are appointment commissions, and the commissions are given to the appointees, the presidential appointees, for their personal use. So essentially the Great Seal serves as a way of authenticating important documents or documents of high ceremony that are signed by the President. So those documents today include international treaties, presidential proclamations, presidential appointment commissions, and since the time of Thomas Jefferson, who was the first Secretary of State, since 1782, it's continued to seal all the important documents, and even today the Department of State seals approximately 3,000 documents a year.
Excellent. All right, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and call now to the screen our public historian, Dr. Alison Mann. Hi, Alison.
Hi, Lauren. Hi, diplomacy fans out there.
Yeah. So we just showed that video, and I love that video. There's a lot to talk about because it offers our viewers, our diplomacy fans, an opportunity to actually go inside the State Department and see where we keep and take care of the Great Seal. And you know what? In the video, Laura Johnson was there, and she's a part of our Office of Presidential Appointments who take care of that seal for us and manage its use. And I want to give them a big shout out. They've been actually great partners for us and helping us share the story about our Great Seal and its history. And for all of you listening, you can look at that video at any time. It's on our website, so feel free to go back at your leisure and take a look at that as well as read a little bit more into the history. But Alison, so the seal, it's kept in that big, beautiful box, and documents pass underneath of it. And there's a big press that, you know, embosses a document. It puts the image of that seal. It marks the document. But I mentioned at the top, as Laura did as well in the video, that the seal goes back to 1782. Is this the seal that they used in 1782?
No, it isn't. This is actually the 7th seal that has been cut from a die. So the original one that was first used in 1782 lasted till about 1841. And the current seal was engraved in 1986. And right now, our visitors to our website, our virtual program, might be interested to know that they're currently doing a laser cut Great Seal. So that's in production. It's done by the Bureau of Engraving. And so that will replace this 1986 steel, the die.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, I know that you, as being a part of our content team in the museum, you work with a lot of our over 9,000 artifacts that we have in our collection, and that you and our colleague Eric Dyke, our collections manager, have carefully selected some of these artifacts in our collection to show where we see some representation of the Great Seal. So I thought we would, you know, take a look at some of those.
Yeah, great, Lauren. I'm glad you brought that up, because there's one thing to have the Great Seal, the actual physical die that embosses these commissions and treaties, but then there's also the representation of the seal, which often is put on all sorts of things, as our visitors will see, to represent the United States of America. So on one hand, it's a signature. On the other hand, it is a significant emblem to represent the nation state.
Excellent. Yeah, right. So that's a really important distinction to make. Like, this is just a representation of the seal. And of course, we commonly see it on our dollar bill, right? That's where I think we're most familiar with seeing it, as on our dollar bill. And I want to add that this is called the obverse of the seal, and that the reverse of the seal, which is also on the dollar bill, which is the unfinished pyramid, that is called the reverse of the seal. So this is the obverse. Excellent. So I'm going to go ahead and move to this.
Yeah, it looks quite a bit different from what you just had on your screen,
It
right?
sure does.
Mhm.
This eagle looks a little scrawny.
Yeah, that's a good way of describing it. Our eagle has gone through a transformation over the past 230 some odd years for sure. And when you talked, Lauren, I like how you brought up the fact that even on the day of independence, that it was important enough for the Continental Congress to decide that the new nation even needed a seal, that it was important enough to establish that committee. And what you see here, eventually, that did become the Great Seal, there was other sorts of ideas bandied about by Jefferson and Adams and Franklin. We know this because John Adams wrote a letter in August of 1776 to his wife, Abigail, saying, yeah, we're on this committee, super busy, and we're also designing the seal for the United States of America. And he talked about other different ideas. So they were first drawing inspiration from classical stories and biblical references. They thought perhaps it might be useful to have Moses depicted parting the Red Sea, and Pharaoh with his chariot overseeing the waters, coming down. And Adam said, but I kind of favored Hercules. Hercules is this figure of strength, holding his staff mightily. And Jefferson came up with a different idea. He thought, maybe we need to put some early representation of Britons in there, because we are sort of taking their government and making it better. So there was all these ideas.
Yeah, those sound more like big sort of narrative paintings.
Yeah, well, you wonder too, like, how big did they plan this seal to be if they were going to put all these representations in this one seal? So, you mentioned it took a while. It took, 7 years. It also went through 3 stages of committees. Franklin went off to Paris, and Jefferson became governor of Virginia, and Adams was working on treaties. And so what we see here from 1782 was designed by Charles Thomson, who was also the secretary for the Continental Congress. And so the eagle was chosen because most of the nations of the world at this time did have an animal, a representation. And the eagle has been known as a symbol, an animal symbol of strength, as well as nobility. And so the eagle was chosen to represent that for the new nation, and very much the symbolism of 13, as you brought out. So this is Charles Thomson's sketch that was submitted to the Continental Congress, and they approved it. And 1782 is a very important year. Why this was so pressing? Because the Americans had won the Battle of Yorktown in 1781, and they knew that the end of the war was near. So they were going to need, a great seal for the United States of America. So what you can see on the right too, that is the actual die from 1782, the one that was in existence until 1841. And that is at the National Archives, where all the retired dies go.
Excellent. So they were thinking ahead. They knew that this was important enough that they needed to plan ahead, and we needed to have this.
Well, it's an interesting conversation, right? What makes a document valid? When you are writing a check out of your checkbook, what validates it? Your signature. No bank is going to take a check signature, right? So
it's the signature of our country.
It's the signature of our country. And so a treaty is not valid. It's not like legitimate in the court of the world unless it has the Great Seal on it.
All right. So I shifted slides here. Ooh, yeah, there's our scrawny eagle on the left.
Yeah, his neck seems to have there, in that seal. And so passports, it's a great way to start this conversation about representations of the Great Seal and how that has evolved over time. So on the left, that is a passport that was granted to David Hinckley. It's the oldest passport in our collection, dating back from the 1790s. And you can see there in the seal, so it's not embossed, right? It's stamped on there. And as you said, Lauren, quite a bit different, scrawny, but it has all of those elements. It has the olive branch, it has the arrows, and it has the banner. And then you can see there that wax seal. So while the Great Seal was being used to emboss, it didn't make any official document less official if it had a wax seal. And so wax seals were commonly used. And so hopefully everyone tuning into the program can see a little bit better the representation of of the eagle, and then of course those decorative elements there in that wax seal that is on that 1790s passport. But then to the right, we have a passport in our collection from 1859. And there's a couple of different things, going on here. First of all, let's look at the representation of the eagle at the top of the document. So what are your thoughts there, Lauren, about that?
Well, it's certainly different. There's nothing in its talons, and it looks like it has a lyre or some kind of harp instead of a shield.
What about the direction of his head?
Ooh, not looking towards where the olive branches would be.
Indeed. And maybe that's something that we forgot to point out. You'll notice that in any representation of the seal, that the eagle's head is always turned towards the olive branch, which is to indicate a preference for peace over war. However, of course, we'll defend ourselves, when necessary. But and then there's a starburst behind him, and you don't have that constellation of stars anymore. But hopefully our viewers can see this too, that it is the representation of the seal right on that document to the right.
Right, as well. Interesting.
So the story behind this is, kind of up to the whims of a Secretary of State. So John Quincy Adams, before he became president, he was Secretary of State. And in the early years of our republic, being the Secretary of State was often the stepping stones to the presidency. And when he was Secretary of State, he added this decorative design element to passports. And so what you see here is something that he designed. And can you see what he's got in the center instead of the shield?
Yeah, it's like the harp, right?
Yeah, it's a lyre. And so we think like, okay, well, what does that mean? What's the symbolism behind that? What was John Quincy Adams trying to get across to everybody? I'm afraid that there's no there's no great secret or mystery behind this. He borrowed this from the Adams family seal. So it was very common for a lot of those early American families to have a crest or a seal of their own, and the Adams family seal had a lyre in it. So I guess when your father was president and you're Secretary of State, why not?
I guess you changed the seal to make it a little bit of your own. Okay.
Let's put a little bit of ourselves there, in that document. And so that decorative element, lasted well beyond, Adams as Secretary of State. And I had our Registrar and Collections Manager, Eric, go take a look at the passports that we have. And he said, seems like it kind of disappeared after the Civil War. So after the Civil War, it underwent a revamping.
Okay. So we're seeing the seal on passports, as we've just said, and this looks like another example of a passport. Now this eagle looks a little more hefty.
Yep, and this is the one that we're accustomed to seeing. So by 1885, that eagle, the way he's heftier, a little bit stronger looking, that was set. So every representation that you'll see of the seal past 1885 is going to be the same. And so one thing I do want to point out is, in a lot of our visitors to the museum and a lot of our education programs, a lot of people say, wow, those passports, they used to be just these big pieces of paper. When did they turn into a booklet? In 1926. That was the first time that people began receiving the passport in the booklet form. And even then you can see there, though, it's very important to have the seal of the United States of America to show just right on the cover. This is an official document entitling the bearer to every right and right of passage and everything else entitled to an American citizen.
Now, this looks like a very old document.
Yes, unfortunately, light and documents do not go very well together, but it's an extremely important addition to our collection. This is the commission that was granted to Martin Van Buren when he was appointed to become Secretary of State. And in the video, Laura did mention that commissions are, part of the documents that go and they get the Great Seal of the United States. So let's just, unpack this. Unfortunately, what would have been the Great Seal is on that mark there, that wax seal that has, faded and sort of been ground down over time. But there's a couple of other interesting things going on in this document. Lauren, do you recognize any of the names here?
Well, I see at the bottom Andrew Jackson, who of course was a president. And then there's a very fancy signature, James Hamilton.
James Hamilton, acting Secretary of State.
Right.
And so commissions, when they get the Great Seal embossed upon them, those commissions are signed by the President of the United States and the Secretary of State. So what happens if you are becoming Secretary of State and you get your commission? You can see there next to James Hamilton's name, acting Secretary of State. Hamilton's name is probably familiar to hopefully a lot of our audience. James Hamilton was one of Alexander Hamilton's son. And in between secretaries of state, when administrations change or secretaries resign, you always have an acting secretary. The United States is never without the authority of a secretary of state. So that's why this commission for Martin Van Buren is signed by the acting secretary of state, James Hamilton, as well as President Andrew.
Interesting. Yep. Excellent.
So this dates from the 1830s.
Now, this looks like a little bit more of a contemporary document for some reason.
Indeed it is. It's also an example of a commission, and this is another item in our collection. It belonged to Ambassador Crocker. And this is what commissions look like now. And if you join the Foreign Service and you go through all your training and you become commissioned, every Foreign Service officer will receive a commission. So commissioned Foreign Service officers, which gives them the authority appointed by the President of the United States to act on behalf of the United States of America. And so there's a couple of interesting things going on with this document. I hope our viewers can see representation of the seal as well as a couple of the signatures. Can you make that out, Lauren?
I can. And I just want to add that when we saw the video, when the seal is impressed on a document, there's a wafer on which it's impressed into the document, and you can sort of see that circular wafer to the bottom or to the left in the little bit of a corner there.
Yes, and also very carefully measured out. In the video, you can see that, he had that template, knew exactly where to emboss that document.
Yes.
And then we have our signatures, of course, of the Secretary of State and the President.
Yep, James Baker III, who of course was a Secretary of State, and the President at the time was George Bush. He was his Secretary of State.
Right. So let's talk a little bit about the document itself, though. It looks a little bit beat up, does it not?
Yeah, it looks like it's muddy.
It is muddy. So this is, not only a way for us to take a document, interpret it in the museum, to tell a story of the Great Seal and of the bearer of this document, which was Ambassador Crocker, a very illustrious diplomat, but it also enables us to tell the story of what happens sometimes overseas. So this commission was Ambassador Crocker's promotion to Minister Counselor, which is a rank in the Senior Foreign Service. And when you are promoted in the Senior Foreign Service, you go from Counselor to Minister Counselor, and you make your way up to Career Ambassador. So each time you get a new commission for that higher rank. And at the time that I want to talk about with this document, Ambassador Crocker was ambassador to Syria. In 1998, there was a protest outside of his residence. The protesters were angry about some bombings in Iraq because Saddam Hussein had violated some UN sanctions. And they gathered at the ambassador's residence and actually broke in. So while Ambassador Crocker was fortunately able to go into a safe room with his wife in the home, they ransacked the lower half of the floor. And you can see this is a very physical example of that attack. And to the left, right where you pointed out the embossed Great Seal, can you make out a footprint, Lauren?
I can. Look with the tread underneath of it.
Right.
Yeah. Right. So it was trampled on? It was underfoot.
It was underfoot.
Not very respectful.
No, it's a poignant example of the dangers that our diplomats can face overseas, because the residences of our diplomats, the embassy itself is the site of protest, but can also be the site of physical attacks.
Yeah. Wow. Powerful. Okay, this is looking different. Not a commission.
Not a commission. So this goes back to us talking about representations of the seal. So this is a plate, right? So this isn't like, a legitimate, signature of the United States.
Right.
It's a plate. It's a decorative item. So you'll often see a representation of the seal on decorative items. And this plate was part of a service, we think, that belonged to Ambassador Guthrie, who was ambassador to Japan around the time of World War I. And I guess the importance of something like this is to show that even though diplomats are abroad, it's very important for them to bring that emblem of the United States, with them, to show that, we continue to showcase our values and our interests in that representation of the seal. And this perhaps could have been used for entertaining when he entertained dignitaries that came to the ambassador's residence.
Mm-hmm.
And to the right, is a really lovely example of a gift that a Secretary of State would have given to foreign dignitaries. This was a silver platter that Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice gave out during her tenure as Secretary of State. And, you can see her signature right below the representation.
I do.
Silver.
Yeah.
And,
excellent.
So the secretaries will often work with protocol to design these gifts. And, there's a lot of thought and a lot of care taken into the gifts, thinking about how can we best represent the United States in this gift that we were then giving to our foreign counterparts.
Yeah, excellent. Wow. So again, there's the seal used to emboss important documents, and then there's the rendering that we see in sort of decorative items like that, but of course still representing the United States. Mm-hmm. And I want to remind all of our viewers out there that we will be taking questions, so make sure you're putting your thoughts and comments and questions in that box, because at the conclusion we'll be able to take a look at those questions and create a little bit of a discussion. All right, now this looks like an embossed seal here.
That is an embossed seal. And, one thing I'd like to point out too is, part of what diplomats and folks that work at the Department of State they have their tools of the trade. Mm-hmm. And this is an example of using the seal as a tool, a diplomatic tool, the tool of the trade. It is a consular seal. So Lauren, have you traveled overseas?
I have.
And taken your passport with you?
Yes, you need
Okay.
it.
So what happens when you get off the plane and you go through the consular window there?
They stamp my passport. They make sure it's me, and then they stamp the passport
mm-hmm.
with the sort of, I guess, the seal of the country to where I'm visiting?
Depending on what their laws are. And in the United States, when consular officers were working overseas in embassies and consulates, sometimes they would use stamps, but more than likely, they would have used a consular press, just like this. And think of it as a mini Great Seal almost, because it's a way of officiating documents without having to send those documents back to Washington, D.C. Because the Great Seal in Washington, D.C. never leaves. It stays there. That's home. Right. That's home base inside the U.S. Department of State. So these consular presses were used by consular officers to make that embossed Great Seal of the United States, again, to give the signature, to give the seal of approval, right, on visas and other official documents of the embassy. And what's really interesting about this seal is not only its function as a tool of diplomacy, but also it's got its own decorative element there. Mm-hmm. Even though that particular eagle is not a faithful representation of that 1885 design of the seal, you can see there it still has the eagle, it still has the banner, and it's still holding the olive branch as well as the arrows. And we think that this seal, this consular press rather, came to us from Istanbul, Turkey. Oh, okay. And we dated it to around turn of the century, possibly late 1890s, early.
Very cool. I love the image on the front. It looks like it's sort of painted on some kind of decorative, maybe even could be an eagle itself that's on the front. It's very cool.
I know. I always think about that. Like, was that sitting on a consular officer's desk?
Yeah.
Yeah. Was it sitting on a shelf? And it's like, where's my seal? Oh, there it is, because it's got the eagle on it. Let me pick that one.
Grab it. Very cool. But you get the sense of the sort of like what we saw in the video, where they have to manually press it in, you kind of get that the sort of the physicality of pulling it down and then embossing a document.
Right. And I think for a lot of our viewers, you know, it would be similar to when you go to a notary public and the notary public will emboss your document for you.
Right. Here are two images of our seal. Both look a little beat up.
Both are a little bit beat up. So again, you know, if you travel overseas and you walk past an American consulate or embassy, you will see a seal, the Great Seal of the United States, represented usually over the doorway of the building. And we do have some damaged seals in our collection. And once again, they really help us to tell the story. When we have our museum open in a few years to the public, you know, we can use these items from our collection not only to unpack the significance of the Great Seal, as well as, you know, the tools of diplomacy that we were talking about, but also the stories about what happened overseas. Seal on the left, and it's hard to imagine here in this representation, but it's humongous. It's about 4 feet in diameter. And this was a seal that was hanging on the consulate in Herat, Afghanistan. And in 2013, a car bomb exploded outside of the embassy, and it was, the consulate, and it was so powerful of a blast that this seal was blown off the building. And what you can see there is a hole that probably came from shrapnel, and some more damage there on the left as a result of that blast. Fortunately, no Americans or staff were hurt in that bombing, which was quite fortunate. But it's another, once again, reminder that when our diplomats and our you know, diplomats are overseas, that the embassy, as well as Ambassador Crocker's residence, you know, that this is the site when somebody wants to make a statement, good or bad, you know, they will come to the embassy.
Right, they go to where that which represents the United States. And so what we've seen is that, and what we've learned is that the Great Seal is impressed on documents such as commissions, which are signed by both the Secretary of State and the President, also treaties, but that the image can also be in something like this, which is put on a building so that you know that it's a federal, U.S. federal government building, or in something like our passports as well, or on a decorative piece that represents, you know, in a gift, an official gift from the United States to another country.
Exactly. And it is, it's so powerful, such a powerful symbol of the United States. It's as easily recognizable as the United States flag, I would say. So let me just mention the seal on the right, which is also a piece in our collection. That was at the embassy in Serbia. And in 2008, when the United States recognized Kosovo as being separate and independent and sovereign from Serbia, an angry mob assembled outside of the embassy and lit cars on fire, turned them over. So what you see there, that those black smudges, is actually this from the smoke, from the damage. The embassy itself was never lit on fire, but, you know, all around it, you know, was so much fire that it damaged this seal.
Wow, very powerful. And it's so great that these two seals are in our collection so that we can tell that story. Yeah. You know, we've got some questions that have come in. Are you ready to take some?
Yeah, great.
All right, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen, come back out of this. I see you. All right, well, thank you for that. That was super interesting. And some of our viewers think so as well. Excellent presentation. Can you please tell us more about the embossing machine that was shown in the video? Maybe perhaps how long it has been in service.
So I guess by machine, do they mean the apparatus of the seal or the cabinet as well?
Well, that's a good point. So the machine is sort of in the cabinet. It's protected in the cabinet, which is under lock and key, as we saw. But I think the machine that holds the die. And it's interesting because I've seen members of the Presidential Appointments Office seal documents, and it looks like it would be easy to turn that arm, and it requires just a tremendous amount of practice and precision, as you were saying, to get that seal just right onto a document.
Yeah, so I guess there's kind of like a corkscrew sort of rod that goes down from the arm that then impresses on the seal. So the seal itself is, it's not huge. It's kind of like that big. I think you can see that in the video. I mean, the cabinet is like, humongous. And
Right.
what I love about that video too is it shows like what you got to go through to get into the seal. So it's like, first you got to badge into that glassed-in area. Then you got to unlock this, you got to open the cabinet and all of that. The cabinet dates back from the 1890s. And if folks want to go back and look at that video again, you can see when he opens up those doors to reveal the die of the Great Seal, the dark color of that wood. And it's lighter on the outside of the cabinet due to sun damage. And
okay.
yeah, the folks in the Presidential Appointments Office told me too, that cabinet was built with such precision. There's no nails in it anywhere. It's all dovetailed.
Oh, wow.
Put
Amazing.
together.
Very cool. Why is the Great Seal housed at the Department of State? And some of this we talked about at the top, but maybe you want to add to that?
Well, I think you said it best, Lauren. I think it's because, it goes back to a lot of people ask us, well, if you deal so much in foreign affairs, why are the U.S. Department of State? And it's because originally when the State Department, the oldest cabinet agency, was formed, it did handle a lot of domestic matters. And so the idea of the seal being the signature of the United States is very much a domestic matter. And I'm not sure if that's answering that question.
No, I think that's right. I mean, and we were charged with the responsibility of caring for it at the time, and that's just a tradition that has continued since 1782, right? We carry that tradition.
Oh, and I think I forgot to mention too, and maybe this sort of speaks to that question, the first time that 1782 die was used, after it was cut, it was to emboss an agreement allowing General George Washington to negotiate with the British on behalf of the United States of America. So even though that's kind of a foreign policy matter, ending a war, it's still much involved with the politics and the future of the nation state, which is a domestic concern.
Oh, interesting, right? Interesting. Okay. There's a couple of them here. So will the image of, because you mentioned that they're recasting the die, would the image of the seal ever change again? Because I think you mentioned Adams kind of, for a time, had his own version of the seal.
Well, that was just a decorative element. That wasn't meant to be anything that was, giving the seal of approval of the United States. It was a decorative element. I mean, I don't foresee that happening. I mean, it's been in this representation since 1885. So that would probably require an act of Congress to change it, to skinny down the eagle again, or
right. Exactly. I hope we don't make him look scrawny anymore. Can I visit the Great Seal?
You can, if you are invited as a guest to the Department of State. It is inside the Department of State building. And so visitors are allowed to go if they're escorted by staff of the Department of State. And it's not always in use, but you can see it when it's not in use. However, when the museum is open in a few years, our plans are to display the Great Seal. So that way visitors to our museum can see not only this exhibit about everything that Lauren and I talked about, but also see the Great Seal in use. Because I think Lauren mentioned that they do about 3,000.
Yeah, documents per year. Yeah, that's quite a lot.
I've seen them kind of walk in there sometimes with a stack, like this big.
Yes.
Clearly, after presidential administrations change, they're really busy, right? Because, there's new appointments. And so I think it ebbs and flows in terms of how many documents they do per day.
Excellent. Great. When the seal is impressed on a document, is the reverse of the seal on the other side? So we talked about how the obverse is the eagle with the olive branch and the arrows, and the reverse is the pyramid, and we see both on the dollar bill, but it's not, there's no reverse on any documents. It's just the obverse that we see.
Yeah, correct. And I've read some anecdotal evidence from the early 1800s that there was a lot of arguing about that, about, you know, if the other side should be in some way, shape, or form as equally as officious, I guess, as the obverse, and that argument never got any traction, never went anywhere.
Right. Well, thank you so much for taking this time and highlighting some things from our collection that, you know, show the prominence of the seal and what does it mean to the United States. And thank you all for participating with us today and sharing with us your thoughts and your comments. And and make sure that you're following us on our social media platforms so you can learn about future programs, because I know I will have Alison back to share some more stories of American diplomacy. So thanks again, Alison.
Yeah, thank you, Lauren, and thanks to our audience for tuning in.
You bet. All right, we'll see you next time.
Okay, bye.
Bye.